Thank you all for being here. Welcome to our next installment of our Dream Job webinar series from the Rubin Company. I'm Danny Rubin, the founder of Rubin. We're in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We help students with their communication skills, their workplace readiness skills. And one way we do that is by talking with professionals in different fields to learn what they do in their job and how they use communication skills to be successful in their job. And today, a great conversation with a great friend, Dan Sonenklar, who works at the state level in the state of Virginia doing transportation planning. And we'll let him talk about his job in just a moment, explain what he does and how he impacts people all across the state in every corner of the state, from dense urban areas to rural communities, and how he and his team help people move around. And they have to manage a lot of money to do so. And he'll show us some slides and some visuals and help us go inside his world. I was going to share my screen, but I think there's some outages going on today across internet land. So what I will share is that on our website, rubineducation.com, when you can visit it, we host and store all of our conversations on our webinars page. So please make sure you visit rubineducation.com and bookmark our webinars page and watch any of these previous conversations in full with your class at a time of your choosing. Okay, with that, since I'm not going to share my screen, but hopefully, Dan, you can keep sharing yours in a moment, sure. I'll introduce Dan. And Dan, give us your career path. Try to condense it down a minute, 90 seconds. Tell us where you've been along the way. You've had a lot of interesting jobs in your field in different countries too. So just hit the highlights for us, bring us up to today, and then we'll jump into your job.
All right. Thank you, Danny. Thank you all for being here today as well. My name is Dan Sonenklar, and my career trajectory started in the Washington, D.C. metro area, where I started working for a local county in Maryland as a comprehensive land use planner. And that's a totally different kind of realm of what I work in than what I do now. But from there, I got my master's degree in urban and regional planning from Virginia Tech. And I went on to work for the regional government in Washington, D.C. It's called the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And there is where I started my kind of transportation career. And there we would kind of bring cities and counties all over the region together to talk about big priorities and big projects that go across various different boundaries there between Maryland and Virginia and the District of Columbia. And from there, I actually went to Bogota, Colombia, to work on a road safety project with the Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I was there for 2 years working on that. Came back and I worked in consulting for a little while. Now, consulting are businesses that offer their professional services to governments and other entities in the space of urban planning or transportation planning, which is my area of expertise. And then for the past 7 years, I made it back down to Richmond, Virginia, which is my hometown, and got a job with the state government here. And my current role is I am a statewide transit planning manager. And what that means for us when we say transit at the state and in the kind of in the space of transportation planning, transit refers to public transportation. So that's buses, subways, ferry boats, and other publicly accessible forms of transportation. And so that is where I am now. Yeah.
Set it up nicely. You've had a lot of jobs, and they've all informed what you do now. And now you're working at the state level, which is so cool. And so we're going to dig into that. As we get started, those of you who are here with us live, if you have questions or your students have questions about Dan's job, please go to the Q&A along the bottom of Zoom and provide your question, and we'll make sure to ask it. So we'll look out for those. So let's start, Dan, let's just dive into right now. What does a day look like? Take us through and there's no average day, but take us through a day. What's going on? What do you have your hands in? And after that, we'll share some visuals.
Okay, great. Um, as you mentioned, my day to day is never really the same. I think a lot of jobs in government are that way, especially when you're working in the area of kind of policy and funding, just because we work with so many different partners and so many different kind of entities around the states that my daily schedule is really different from week to week. And so a typical day for me could include traveling to various parts of Virginia to sit in on meetings and conversations about public transportation priorities in that area and helping them kind of decide how to prioritize, which by prioritize, I mean kind of list and order and rank order what their needs and what their most pressing projects are. Um, so that's sometimes I travel around and I do that. Sometimes I am in my office doing technical exercise, reviewing kind of historic funding levels for various different programs that we oversee here at the state. And I will just mention that here in my agency, which is the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, specifically on the public transportation side of things, we oversee about $1 billion a year in transportation funding that goes to various different providers
Billion
throughout the state.
dollars. That's a
A
lot.
billion dollars, yes. And about half of that, about half, goes to WMATA, which is the parent agency that runs the DC Metro system. Which, if anybody has visited Washington, DC, I'm sure you've been in the subway system there. It's kind of an iconic transportation system with the way that its stations are designed. You can't really forget it. But yeah, we give, as the state of Virginia, as one of the main three partners in the with Metro, we provide a lot of money to them every year. Then the rest of the money, the other half, goes to some small rail programs, but the majority goes to what we call our capital and operating programs for public transportation. So by capital, it means we fund the purchase of things like buses and rail cars. And operating, we help pay for day-to-day expenses like salaries and gasoline and other things like that. And that is the majority of the funding that we give out in a given year.
Half of the money goes to one part of the state, which tells you how densely populated and the demand in Northern Virginia relative to the entire rest of the state. So that's very telling. Go ahead and share your screen. Let's look at some visuals. Let's go inside your work, see how you use maps and how you share information down from the state capital down into the rest of the state.
Okay. Are you seeing a map or are you seeing a picture?
I'm seeing a map.
Okay, great. So I'll start here. There's a lot of different technical aspects to the work that we do here in my agency. But what we're looking at here is actually a statewide map of the state of Virginia. And what you're seeing on here with all of the dots and the lines, that is a series of public transportation routes surrounding various different cities and counties in the state. And the dots are the specific bus stops that those agencies operate. And so one of the main things we do here at the state is gather information from all of our transit providers to tell the story of public transportation in the state. And part of that is illustrating it in a map form. So there's a few things you can easily see on here is that, first of all, there is public transportation everywhere in the state, whereas many people don't know that in small rural areas in the West, we have systems that are providing rides for people to get to work and medical appointments and kind of to satisfy their daily mobility needs to the major big city areas where there's many more lines and dots, like the Hampton Roads area where Danny is from, or the Richmond area where I am from, or to Danny's point, the Northern Virginia area, which really has a whole lot more. And a lot of this happens in the spread of different types and densities of service really is responding to population in different areas of the states. And of course, the priorities of the local governments that help to operate these systems. So Northern Virginia is our most populated area. The whole DC metro region has something like 7 million people. And I think 3.5 million live in Northern Virginia. And
Well, I have
so,
a question about this, just as I
yeah.
look at this, like, how do you manage all of these metro stations, bus routes, subway lines? Like, everything's in constant motion. And how does your team make sure that everything is moving along as it should every day? Because it's just an enormous amount to think about happening simultaneously in every city, in every county in the state.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is that we don't do it alone. So in the state of Virginia, there's probably over 10,000 people working in the public transportation industry to make sure all of these systems and services are running every day. My office is a small office with the state. We control money and we control what we call oversight, which is when you give out money to make sure people are spending it responsibly and what they have told us they would spend it on, following all of the state and national federal rules that we have around it. That's a lot of what we do here. But once the money leaves the state or the federal government, it goes to agencies that employ thousands of people around the state. Some of those are bus drivers. Some of those are maintenance staff, making sure that the stops and stations are clean and able to be used in a given day. Others are, the CEOs or the general managers of independent transit agencies that are making local decisions and working with local politicians to make sure they're able to provide those services every day.
Got it. Thank you. That's really helpful to understand. It's not just your team in Richmond. There are thousands of people every day that are managing all these systems. Go ahead and show some more data, some more visuals.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, at the state level, we do a lot of kind of gathering of data and making it publicly accessible for analysis purposes or for public information. And so here you can see all of the different services around the state. But another aspect of what we prepare and illustrate for people is information about what we call performance data. And I won't get into the technical definitions here of performance data. But what happens here is that of those agencies that receive funding from us, they have to report to us how many people are using their systems on a monthly basis. And so here, with this illustration here, we have built a illustration of ridership. So that's the number of people getting on and off of vehicles over the last 5 years.
Okay.
That kind of helps us tell the story about how transit use is either shrinking or growing.
It looks like
And
it's growing here, if I'm reading it correctly.
it is growing here, but you all will likely remember that in 2020, we had a global pandemic,
Oh, yes. Right, right, right.
which you can all imagine in the space of public transportation, it led to way less people getting in their buses and trains to go to work on a daily basis. And so we are just now in 2025 getting up to the ridership levels of what we had seen before the
Wow, it took
pandemic.
5 years to bring it back.
It did. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it is more working from home or working from remote locations. Other parts of it are that, for 2 or 3 years in there, the services weren't even operating at capacity. And so they didn't offer as many routes or services in that period of
So
time.
I have a question about this. And what we do a lot, Dan, in these conversations is we learn to ask follow-up questions. And that's a big part of learning about a career is like leaning in and asking things we want to know more about. So when the ridership goes down or up, does that impact the funding that those localities receive based on the
Very,
data?
very good question, and it depends on the state and how rules are set up there. So here in Virginia, we have a kind of complicated mathematical formula that we use each year to determine how much operating assistance we give each agency each year. And one aspect of that, one metric that we use in that is ridership. And so if an agency's ridership has gone down a lot compared to the rest of the agencies in the state, it may lead them to receive less funding in a future year.
An agency, by agency, you could mean like a city like Richmond or a city like Arlington. That would be an agency that has their own transportation office, and that's the agency that would receive or does receive funds from you. Is that correct to say? An agency like a
Correct. But
city?
Yeah, I will. I'll give a little bit more information to that. An agency can be a local government, a city or a county, or it can be an independent public charter business, is what they're called, that is set up as a business entity that is not for profit. And so they are fulfilling a public need. And so, for example, here in Richmond, we have an agency called GRTC that operates as an independent business, but that is not aimed at making a profit. So that is also what we are referring to when we say
Okay.
that. So
Thank you.
same thing with Metro. Metro is a transit agency that operates in Maryland, DC, and Virginia.
Okay, thank you. Continue on if you want to show any more visuals.
Yeah, no problem. So, in addition to collecting ridership data, we also collect information on how much service is being provided. So, there's a lot of insider terminology in here that you don't need to know all the details here of, but essentially we collect how many hours and miles each of these agencies are operating each month, and that gives us a picture about how much service is available throughout the state. And in addition to that, we then calculate metrics combining those. So we look at passengers per mile, passengers per hour, and later on in the process, we also look at cost per hour, mile, and passenger. And we use those metrics to help make funding decisions.
Thank you. Really, it's such good data to see at a state level, which I know it just informs everything you do for this sort of top-down data. Go ahead.
It does, yeah. And so to get to this point, though, you have to kind of use a mix of skills to arrive here.
Ah,
We
tell me
don't
more.
need to only know how to program these kind of fancy looking graphics that are interactive and respond to the user inputs. We also have to know what makes for a good story. And so in doing that, every aspect of our job here is storytelling, which takes
Give me an
good
example.
communication. So an example of storytelling is that, for example, what we were talking about a moment ago about ridership throughout the state over the last 5 years. And so to get a profile of how much transit is being operated and how much it's being used, we have to understand what the numbers mean and how to weave a story together with kind of complicated information into something that's understandable to decision makers.
Okay.
And so in the space of urban planning in general, but really specifically transportation, I see my job anywhere I go as being a storyteller. And what I mean by that is being able to take very complicated, sometimes engineering information, finance information, and other kinds of technical data, and pulling out the aspects of that are needed to tell a coherent story. So to do
Because
that,
sometimes you're talking with people that are not familiar with your world. You have to put it in language that they'd understand. And what is the purpose of telling them a story? What are you trying to achieve through that story?
that is a great question, and there's multiple things we try to achieve through that story. Sometimes we are facing a situation where we need more funding in the state to maintain the transportation services that we currently have. To do that, you all can imagine that some politicians don't want to give more money to a public transportation system all the time. And telling that story about how much things are used, what kind of benefit we get out of it as a state and as a country, and how it impacts individual people really helps us tell that story and sell that point. In addition, at a local level, if an agency wanted to expand service to a new region and they need more support and funding for that, they need to be able to tell their elected officials, their mayors and their city councils, why transportation and public transportation specifically is important. And I was
Ultimately, you're a storyteller, ultimately, when you boil it all down. And we talk about that with students too. When you're promoting yourself, you need to put your own achievements in a story form, right? Don't just tell someone you work hard. Give them a moment in time where you solve the problem. Let them tell them a story, paint them a picture. So for you, it goes the other way too. In your job, you recognize the value of painting a picture and making it easy to understand the impact.
Exactly. And I was
You can
going to just
share
so
again if you want. I turned off your screen just so
oh,
we
you
could
did.
talk a bit more. But if you want to share again, you can share.
Sure. Yes, I was going to just show one example of this at the state level. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's
Okay.
okay. I just thought we would talk for a bit so we didn't need to look. And we're like in small screens when you share. And by the way, if anybody has questions who is watching live, please put it in the Q&A and I'll be sure to ask. Go ahead, Dan.
So, a prime example of this, and so to the point you're making, Danny, is that like there's multiple different skills that we all use every day in this career field in my job that I have to use every day. Some of those are, you know, some basic math skills. Some of them are more complex math skills. Some of them have to do with programming and building, you know, those tools that I was showing online a moment ago. But all of those kind of combine into what I see as creating this narrative. And sometimes the way that comes out is in the form of documents that kind of highlight what we're working on. And so this is a study that we put out a few years ago on the economic impacts of public transportation in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so this took some graphic design skills to arrive at, that took some of those narrative points and put them together into a quick, understandable document where we can explain things like this, like what you see on the screen here. Some of the key findings of this study. Now, this study was a 150-page technical analysis done by some economists that work for us, but we bubbled those results down into what you see here, that every dollar of public investment in transportation generates $2.86 of economic activity in the state. So we're telling that story that, hey, politicians out there, if you invest more money, you're going to get benefits out of this, right? That transit supports nearly 30,000 jobs in the state. It creates $1.9 billion in labor income just from the industry. It increases the economic output of the state by $3.4 billion, and it brings back $600 million in taxes. And so these are the kind of points that are really important to decision makers when they're thinking through big decisions.
So that's what I wanted to ask is, are you then sharing this document with legislators, with, offices, delegates and state senators, and like sending it to their offices so that their staffs see this? Like, who sees this information? Who do you need to see this information?
So this study was designed with two audiences in mind. The big takeaways were aimed at the statewide politicians that make decisions on our funding. And we successfully used this study to help support a successful request for more than $35 million in additional funding each year for our capital program. We published it in 2020, and later that year, we were able to pass some legislation that got us more money. We also try to gear these towards other people and other audiences. And to that effect, I'll just roll down here. Sorry, these are all statewide results, but we also do regional results where we look at different kinds of areas in the state so that they can then take this information. For example, in Northern Virginia, we isolated the study to that area.
Yep,
we also isolated to other urban areas. And so at a local level, people can take this study too and take it to their elected officials and say, hey, look, in an area like Charlottesville, another urban area here in Virginia, public transportation is an economic benefit. And so we have to think through multiple narratives and multiple different audiences at all times.
Even though you're not in a for-profit business, this is a bit of sales. You're going out and saying, look at the results we get. We need more funding to do more good work. So you're having to wear that sales hat in some ways and promote your office in the same way that anybody running a business would be out there promoting their successes of their business to get the next big contract. So there is an element of sales here, and that's hence why the storytelling comes in.
Yeah, in politics and in governing, selling your ideas is always important, which is why learning to speak publicly And speak publicly with confidence is a very important skill to have.
Let's talk about that because
Okay.
we talk about the importance of people skills, communication skills. I know that you travel the state, you drop into meetings with different stakeholders, and you're the state person in the room. So, how have you learned to improve and work on your speaking skills and your sort of managing groups and sort of that dynamic? How do you bring that in? How do you wear that hat?
Yeah. So yeah, I find myself in a lot of situations where I'm speaking to a lot of different groups about a lot of different things. And so I think the number one skill for presenting publicly is understanding your audience,
Mm,
their perspective, and their level of technical expertise. And that way you can cater whatever you're saying to them. So a key point of that is understanding who will be in attendance prior to showing up and coming prepared to possibly speak to a few different levels of expertise,
I love
depending on
that.
what you find.
So you are preparing. So who do you ask the person running the meeting on the ground who's going to be there? Do you ask those questions beforehand so you know what you're walking into?
Exactly. So if it's not a group that I am familiar with, I will ask who will be there, kind of what timing we're looking at. So how much time I have to describe what I'm looking at, which often indicates how detailed you can be in a presentation. And if important decisions are going to be made that day, or if it's more of a informative presentation. And so you can always cater these kinds of presentations to who is listening to you.
See, that's great because we talk a lot in here about going to a job interview. And before you walk in that room or do the virtual interview, you need to know that company intimately. You need to have researched their business on their website. You need to know who's doing the interview and look them up on LinkedIn. Know who you're talking to. Know where they're coming from. Know their background. Like understand what you're about to step into. And you're doing the exact same thing in a job, not even applying for a job. You're doing it because you're still out there having to prove yourself and prove the merits of your office, even though you're in the job. So I think the same skills apply whether you're applying for roles or you're in a job and you've been there several years now, but you still have that mindset of preparation. We do have a question, Erin Deaver and her students. Thank you. She said, where do you see public transportation going in the future? Do you see more people utilizing public transportation in the future?
Great. Before I answer that question, I wanted to just
Yeah,
echo
go
one
ahead.
of the things that you said there, Danny. And I would say the other thing that I would do in preparing for a presentation is never assume that your audience knows what you know.
Love it.
So you always want to explain yourself in layman's terms in a way that somebody else can understand what you're saying, which means get rid of jargon,
Yep.
explain any sort of abbreviations or short form that you're using. Do not assume that people know where you're coming from. Tell them where you're coming from.
I love
Okay,
that. Thank you. And then, yeah,
no
Aaron's
problem.
question about where is the transportation field going? Where do you see next to, 3, 5, 10 years?
So, in my point of view, public transportation is going to be more and more needed in more and more places. In order to address some of the bigger challenges that we're facing globally and in this country, public transportation is a very important. Um, it's a very important investment strategy to relieve congestion and traffic on highways, to lower our environmental impact, and to make sure that everybody, including our low income earners, anybody in society can participate and fulfill their mobility needs. So, for that reason alone, I do believe that public transportation will continue to grow in the United States.
Hmm.
Now, there are challenges. Everything is more expensive than it was just a few years ago. And so making sure that we have proper levels of funding from our federal governments and from our state governments is really, really important to making sure that we can continue to grow our footprints throughout the country and the state, but also to make sure that more people can access our systems on a daily basis and really utilize systems that can help them fulfill their needs. For example, a lot of our transit systems in the state, especially in rural areas, only provide routes every 45 minutes to an hour, which makes it very difficult to take the bus to go shopping or to go to a doctor's appointment because you're always going to have to wait for that next bus. So one of the really important things to me is to increase frequencies, to increase the quality of service everywhere transit goes. And I think if we can do that effectively, more people will continue to use the system.
Great. Thank you for answering their question. And I have one more kind of heading for home here. You've been in the field for a long time. You've been on different sides of it, in, various angles, different roles. Why do you enjoy this work, and why would you encourage students to pursue this field?
Okay, that's a great question. I enjoy transportation planning specifically because it's a very technical field that allows you to take that complicated information and distill it into stories. I am by my training more of a storyteller, more of a policy person, more of a big ideas kind of guy. But I also like the intricacies of what goes into things like engineering and design and mathematical modeling of transportation behavior. I know that's a complicated concept, but that's where engineers get together and put together a complicated model in a computer system to predict how people will travel on roadways and in transit systems. And I love that this field can take those technical aspects and force us to kind of bubble them down into stories to tell to the public. And I like the mix of those two things together. There's a lot of fields that are either one or the other. This one is really a meeting of the two.
Cool. To be able to have to think big and small at the same time, and then marry the two to make sense for different stakeholders.
Yeah,
That definitely will, I'm sure it challenges you every day to
it
have
does.
to think on both levels all the time. And then
Yeah,
ultimately translate it down to someone who has no idea what you do at all. And they just say,
exactly.
make the buses move, make the train go, right? And so it's like that's an incredible challenge.
It is.
And then you're impacting hundreds of thousands, millions of people every
Yep,
day, every year who depend on you. And all they need to know is that the bus is going to show up when it says it's going to show up. That's their primary concern. So they can get
we're
to work on time.
responsible for getting the bus there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, we don't think about the systems going on to make everything happen right on schedule. And we just take it for granted when it's there. And as soon as it's not, it's a huge problem for
Exactly.
everybody.
And
So
I will add to that everybody, and you said this, everybody uses transportation in one way, shape, or form. I don't work directly with highway planning, but the majority of people, of course, are
of
getting
course,
around in their cars on the highways. Now, so do our buses. And so they benefit from that work as well. But everybody interacts with transportation. Everybody needs transportation. Everybody understands the universal concepts that we're dealing with. What we are dealing with in my office is, I'll use a metaphor. It's untangling all of the spaghetti it takes to get the money and the ideas to local providers to get services on the road. And that's what we are dedicated to every day. And that's what I really enjoy about my job.
great way to end it. Great metaphor too. The spaghetti. I can picture that. That's a good way to put it to someone like me who doesn't know every intricacy of your work. So well done
Thank
there.
you.
All right. So I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Dan. That was awesome. Really, and you do. I can see how you do it. If you're like dropping into a meeting with us today, as you would any other part of the state, and you explain it very well. And I have a really good understanding. And I've asked you many times about your work, and I have an even clearer understanding today.
Well, good.
So thank you. Thank you, Ava, for being here. We will meet again, everybody, on December 3rd. It's the Wednesday after Thanksgiving. We're talking to a biomedical engineer, and he works at Ohio State. That'll be a really cool conversation, a fast growing field. And so please join us in a couple of weeks for that. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving break with your families, and we will see you in early December. Dan, thank you again.